Hey everybody, welcome back to Illustrated Myths. Real quick before I start, I wanted to let you all know that I'll be taking all of my paintings of witches and goddesses and turning them into an oracle deck. If you're unfamiliar, oracle decks are a bit like tarot cards, but they don't have any predetermined structure, so the meanings of the cards can be whatever the author wants them to be. And I thought this series of paintings would be perfect. As I was researching the women behind the myths and legends, I felt like we all at times kind of embodied aspects of each of them. For example, sometimes I needed to bring a bit more Kali energy into my day, or meditate a bit on the fact that Persephone is totally okay with both her bubbly spring goddess side and the side of her that gets super into bringing judgment down on souls in the underworld. I'll be releasing a Kickstarter for the deck in October, and if you'd like to learn more about it, you can follow the link I've put down in the video description below. Okay, back to Illustrated Myths. So this week I'll be talking about Tiamat, the primordial goddess of saltwater in Babylonian mythology. She features most prominently in the Enuma Elish, which is also known as the Seven Tablets of Creation. It dates to about 1100 BCE and tells us all about the birth of the gods and the creation of man. Now this is all, of course, according to the Babylonian scribes, but there's evidence that the tablets are copies of even older versions of the myth. In any case, here's what the tablets tell us. In the beginning, there was nothing but water swirling around in a vast expanse of chaos. Eventually, the water split itself in two, half of it fresh, half of it salty as can be. The fresh water chose a name, Apsu, the first of the gods, and the salt water became Tiamat, the first goddess. After a few millennia with only each other for company, the two decided they were both a bit lonely and joined together to fill the void of the universe with an entire generation of younger gods and goddesses. Suddenly, existence for the two water deities changed dramatically. They had spent an eternity, as far back as either of them could remember, in almost complete silence. In comparison, the cacophony that the younger pantheon created around Apsu and Tiamat was almost unbearable. They couldn't sleep at night, and all throughout the day their thoughts were constantly scattered by the rambunctious bunch of youngsters. That night, as they both lay awake and restless, Apsu finally gushed to Tiamat about how he felt. He had decided that maybe creating a whole generation had been a bit ambitious. I mean, they were the first gods, so it made sense that they might make some mistakes. But if they created the younger gods, they could just uncreate them, right? The gods probably wouldn't feel a thing, and then he and Tiamat could finally get some rest. Maybe after a while, they could even try again. Maybe get a dog first, see how that goes. Tiamat did not react how Apsu had expected her to. She was outraged and shocked that he would even consider killing off their offspring. I mean, yeah, the younger gods were pretty crazy, but that was apparently what having a family was like. And they couldn't just take it back. This was life now, and Apsu was just going to have to deal with it. Tiamat stormed out of the room, and on her way back to her own side of the cosmos, almost ran right into her son Enki. Enki could tell something was seriously wrong, so he pressed his mother to please talk to him. Tiamat spilled the beans. Your father, she said, is thinking of killing you, all of you. She loved Enki most of all, so she warned her son to stay as far away from Apsu as possible, while she thought of a way to convince her husband to stop his insidious plan. Enki was shaken, but he hid his fear and comforted Tiamat until she left. She may have had faith in her ability to talk to her partner, but Enki wasn't about to sit around to see if Apsu would come to his senses. No, he was going to take matters into his own hands. Enki was beloved for a reason. Of all the curtain gods, he was said to be the most knowledgeable and the most skilled. Somehow, he knew incantations that even Apsu didn't. So Enki decided to give Apsu the thing he'd been craving for so long. With a spell, Enki put Apsu into a deep sleep. When he was sure the god was completely unconscious, Enki tore Apsu's crown from his head, and killed his father without hesitation. Weary and disoriented from what he had just done, Enki left Apsu's remains and made his way back to his home to rest. At least now, he could sleep knowing he and his siblings were safe. I like to think Enki felt some remorse about having to kill his own father, but if he did, he didn't show it. In fact, it's pretty much the opposite. Rather than mourn, Enki built a castle on the grave of his father and called the dwelling itself Apsu. He and his wife lived in splendor, and in Apsu they gave birth to and raised the terrible Marduk, a giant and reportedly handsome god, despite his 4 ears and eyes. Too young by God standards to really know what to do with his prodigious powers, Marduk whipped up hurricanes that sent dust clouds careening across the cosmos, disturbing all of creation and alarming a few of the gods who weren't the happiest about Apsu's death. Fatefully, the winds and dust also tousled the hair of Tiamat, who wiped away the last of the tears in her eyes. She had grieved long enough for the loss of her beloved Apsu. Now, as she faced the castle of her son in the distance, her jaw clenched. It was time for payback. Only one god, Kingu, had come to her aid when Apsu had been murdered, and now she handed him the tablets of destiny, which would legitimize him as the new ruler of the gods. Tiamat had decided long ago, as more gods had come to her complaining of Marduk's storms, that she could no longer be a leader to her creations. Instead, she would be their destroyer. Tiamat lifted her hands into the air and summoned the forces of chaos to create 11 horrible monsters. Giant serpents, dragons, and scorpion-human hybrids with poison for blood. And with Kingu as her champion, she went to war. Enki and the younger gods were exhausted. This was taking forever. Enki was the smartest and most talented, but even his incantations were no match for Tiamat and her monsters. She was slaying gods right and left, without so much as losing a sweat. It was all they could do to just slow her down a bit. They were running out of heroes to throw at her, so Enki finally turned to his last resource, the one he really did not want to use. The god was his only son, and he didn't want to lose him. But Marduk's face shone when his father called on him to save his family and friends. As he rode his storm chariot toward the battlefield, Marduk called winds from all directions to his aid, and notched an arrow in his bow. Unfortunately for Tiamat, Marduk didn't just have his brawn. Enki's craftiness had been passed on to his son as well, though the young god hadn't had time to prove it yet. As clouds and lightning swirled around them, Marduk faced Tiamat and her army alone. The mother goddess expected him to tremble at the sight of her monsters. Heck, some of her own men couldn't hide their fear. But Marduk never quivered. Instead, he called out to her, taunting her. She seemed like she could pretty much destroy anything, so how about a one-on-one? You know, just for kicks. Tiamat was enraged by the petulant god, so much so that she motioned to her troops to stand down, and decided to open her mouth so she could gobble him up in one gulp. This would have been a good plan, except that Marduk was hoping for exactly such an opportunity. As she moved toward him with her mouth agape, Marduk unleashed the storm winds he had been holding at bay. They rushed into Tiamat's mouth, and with the combined force of a hurricane, held her down from the inside, while Marduk lifted his arrow and let it fly directly into her stomach. In a moment, Tiamat was dead, split in two by Marduk's magic arrowhead. At the sight of her corpse, her troops scattered as her monsters slowly disintegrated into nothing. It was over. For better or worse, the hero of Babylon, Marduk, had won against the goddess of all creation. The time of the old gods had come to an end. But Marduk wasn't finished yet. If the goddess of creation was dead, he was going to take her place and create a whole new world. He took Tiamat's lower body, and from it he fashioned the fertile and life-sustaining earth. With her top half, he made the celestial bodies of the sky, and the vault of her ribs held up the heavens. From her eyes, still crying for her lost love Apsu, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flowed to give life to the cradle of a new civilization. Finally, Marduk took the tablets of destiny from Tiamat's champion Kingu and sentenced him to death for his part in the war. From Kingu's blood, Marduk and Enki created a new kind of being, not gods, but man, which they sent to live on the new world Marduk had built. I know that ultimately the 7 Tablets of Creation is supposed to be a reverent account of the rise of Marduk, the Babylonian king of the gods, and the creation of man, but to me it's always read as a tragedy. A warning story of a family torn apart by violence, hot tempers, and an inability to communicate. Still, it's impressive to think that the Babylonians believed that the world as they knew it was made from a goddess's body. And I like to think that Tiamat was able to reunite with Apsu after death. Thanks for watching the 3rd episode of Illustrated Myths. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful week, guys!